You wake in the dead of night to the sound of bells tolling across a moonlit village square. The year is 1347, and through your shuttered window, you glimpse shadows moving in ways that would make your parish priest cross himself in terror. Welcome to medieval Europe, where the line between sacred and profane, between holy ritual and carnal desire, was drawn not by logic or science, but by the fevered imagination of minds wrestling with flesh in ways that would shock even our modern sensibilities. The cobblestone streets echo with whispers of practices so bizarre, so utterly alien to our understanding of intimacy, that historians have spent centuries either burying these secrets in dusty archives or dismissing them as folklore. But what if I told you that beneath the pious exterior of medieval Christianity lay a seething underworld of sexual customs that were not only tolerated, but actively encouraged by the very institutions that preach chastity and virtue? Before diving into these forgotten chambers of medieval desire, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths that history tried to bury, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient mysteries together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared fascination with the stranger corners of human experience. Tonight, we're going to descend into a world where wedding nights required witnesses, where priests blessed the marriage bed with rituals that would make a modern person blush, and where the church itself created loopholes for desires so specific, so carefully catalogued, that they read like a medieval manual of forbidden pleasures. This isn't just about what people did behind closed doors. This is about an entire civilization that found ways to transform shame into sacrament, sin into ceremony, and desire into divine mystery. The first shock comes not from what medieval Europeans did, but from who was watching them do it. In the great manor houses and royal courts of medieval Europe, privacy was not just rare, it was actively discouraged. The marriage bed, that most intimate of spaces, was surrounded by a theatre of observers whose presence was not accidental, but absolutely required by law and custom. Picture this scene, documented in countless marriage contracts from the 13th century onward. The newlywed couple, trembling with nervousness and anticipation, would be escorted to their chamber by a procession of family members, clergy, and appointed witnesses. These weren't casual observers, but official attesters whose job was to verify that the marriage was properly consummated. The bride's mother would examine the sheets for proof of virginity, while the groom's family ensured he had fulfilled his marital duty. But this was only the beginning of the spectacle. In noble families, the bedding ceremony became an elaborate ritual that could last for hours. Guests would throw rice, flowers, and blessed herbs onto the marriage bed, while singing songs that were equal parts blessing and instruction manual. The couple would be physically undressed by members of the wedding party, each piece of clothing removed with specific prayers and ceremonies designed to ensure fertility and passion. The church, far from condemning these practices, actively participated in them. Priests would bless the marriage bed with holy water, recite special prayers for conjugal bliss, and even provide detailed instructions for proper positioning and timing. Marriage manuals written by clergy contained advice so explicit that they were locked away in monastery libraries, accessible only to those with special permission. What's most disturbing about these customs isn't their public nature, but their underlying purpose. Medieval society believed that sexual pleasure within marriage was not just acceptable, but spiritually necessary. The church taught that mutual satisfaction between spouses was a religious obligation, a way of honoring God through the proper use of the body. This led to practices that seem almost clinical in their precision. Married couples were given schedules dictating when intercourse was permitted and when it was forbidden. The church calendar was filled with periods of sexual abstinence, feast days when pleasure was encouraged, and specific rituals designed to maximize both physical satisfaction and spiritual merit. Couples were taught positions that would ensure conception while avoiding the sin of excessive pleasure, a delicate balance that required guidance from religious authorities. The role of confession in medieval sexual life reveals another layer of this bizarre system. Priests were required to ask detailed questions about their parishioners' intimate lives, not to shame them, but to provide guidance and absolution. Confessional manuals from the period read like comprehensive sex education guides, covering everything from frequency and technique to the proper prayers to recite during the act itself. But perhaps the most shocking aspect of medieval sexual culture was the Church's attitude toward what they called conjugal debt. This was the legal and religious obligation of spouses to satisfy each other's sexual needs, regardless of personal desire or circumstances. A husband could be excommunicated for denying his wife sexual access, just as a wife could face severe penalties for refusing her husband's advances. This system created a complex web of rights and obligations that governed every aspect of intimate life. Spouses who travelled for extended periods had to provide written permission for their partners to seek satisfaction elsewhere, creating a medieval form of sanctioned adultery that was carefully regulated by church law. The documents authorising these arrangements were kept in church archives, alongside marriage certificates and baptismal records. The wealthy classes developed their own elaborate customs around these religious requirements. Noble families would hire specialists called bedwarmers, whose job was to ensure that the marriage chamber was properly prepared for conception. These weren't simple servants, but trained experts who understood the complex intersection of medicine, religion, and desire that governed medieval intimate life. These bedwarmers would burn specific incenses designed to increase fertility, arrange symbolic objects around the room to encourage conception, and even provide physical guidance to couples who were struggling to fulfill their religious obligations. Their services were so valued that successful bedwarmers could command salaries higher than skilled craftsmen or minor clergy. The tools and preparations used in these rituals reveal a medieval world obsessed with the mechanics of pleasure in ways that modern society might find both fascinating and disturbing. Aphrodisiac recipes were passed down through generations of noble families, carefully guarded secrets that combined exotic spices, precious metals, and ingredients so rare they had to be imported from distant lands. But we've only begun to scratch the surface of medieval Europe's most bizarre intimate customs. The practices I've described so far were the publicly acknowledged rituals, the ones that polite society could discuss in daylight. What happened in the shadows, in the secret chambers where even the church's elaborate rules couldn't reach, reveals a side of medieval life that challenges everything we thought we knew about the so-called Dark Ages. The underground networks that flourished beneath medieval Europe's pious facade operated with a sophistication that would impress modern organised crime. These weren't random gatherings of deviants, but carefully orchestrated societies with their own codes, hierarchies, and rituals that perverted religious ceremony into something far more sinister. In the great cities of medieval France and Germany, secret brotherhoods known as courts of love emerged among the nobility. These weren't the romanticized gatherings that troubadour songs celebrated, but twisted tribunals where aristocrats would gather to judge elaborate sexual competitions. Participants would present detailed accounts of their conquests, their techniques, their ability to seduce members of the clergy, or break the vows of married nobles. The most disturbing aspect of these courts wasn't their existence, but their integration into respectable society. Many participants were judges, bishops, and even members of royal households who saw these gatherings not as rebellion against Christian morality, but as its natural extension. They argued that God had created desire for a purpose, and that purpose was to explore every possible variation of human pleasure. These courts developed their own perverse sacraments. New members underwent initiation rituals that mimicked religious ceremonies, but replaced Holy Communion with acts so depraved that surviving records were deliberately destroyed by later church authorities. The few fragments that remain describe ceremonies involving sacred relics used in ways that would make even hardened historians uncomfortable. The participants wore masks carved to resemble saints and angels while engaging in activities that directly mocked religious imagery. They would recite prayers backwards, use holy oil for purposes that violated every principle of Christian teaching, and create elaborate theatrical productions where biblical stories were reenacted with explicit sexual content. But perhaps most shocking was the participation of women in these societies. Medieval records reveal that noble ladies didn't just attend these gatherings as passive observers, but served as judges, organizers, and active participants in ways that completely contradict our understanding of medieval gender roles. These women wielded power within these secret societies that they could never exercise in the outside world. The Countess Mathilde de Champagne, one of the most powerful women in 12th century France, reportedly maintained a private chapel where she would conduct what she called divine marriages. These ceremonies involved multiple participants and rituals that combined elements of Christian wedding rites with practices derived from pre-Christian fertility cults that had survived centuries of religious suppression. The influence of these underground networks extended far beyond their immediate participants. They created an alternative economy based on the trade of forbidden knowledge, exotic substances, and services that couldn't be obtained through conventional channels. Merchants would travel hundreds of miles to deliver rare ingredients for aphrodisiac preparations that were said to induce experiences beyond normal human sensation. Alchemists working for these societies developed compounds that claimed to enhance pleasure, extend performance, and even enable supernatural experiences during intimate encounters. These weren't simple herbal remedies, but complex preparations involving mercury, lead, and other substances that were literally poisoning their users while promising transcendent pleasure. The most sought after of these preparations was called devil's honey, a mixture so potent that a single dose was said to cause hallucinations lasting for days. Users reported experiencing intimate encounters with supernatural beings, visions of paradise and hell intertwined, and sensations that they described as literally divine. The long-term effects were horrific, causing madness, physical deformity, and death, but demand remained constant among the wealthy classes who could afford such exotic corruption. These substances weren't just consumed but incorporated into elaborate rituals that transformed private chambers into theatres of controlled madness. Participants would fast for days before consuming these compounds, believing that hunger enhanced their effects. They would surround themselves with religious imagery while engaging in acts that deliberately blasphemed against those same sacred symbols. The Church's response to these underground networks reveals the complexity of medieval religious authority. Rather than simply condemning these practices, Church leaders developed what they called controlled heresy, a system that allowed certain transgressions to continue under careful supervision. This wasn't tolerance, but a calculated decision to manage sin rather than eliminate it entirely. Selected monasteries became centers for this controlled corruption, places where church authorities could study and document these practices while claiming to combat them. Monks would spend years infiltrating these secret societies, recording their rituals in detail, and occasionally participating themselves under the pretense of gathering intelligence for church authorities. The documents produced by these ecclesiastical spies reveal a world of organized depravity that operated parallel to official religious institutions. They describe networks spanning entire kingdoms, with coded communication systems, safe houses, and recruitment methods that targeted the most powerful members of medieval society. As dawn breaks over the ancient stones of medieval cathedrals, casting shadows that dance like ghosts of forgotten desires, we're left to contemplate a civilization that was far stranger and more complex than any history book dared reveal. These weren't the simple, pious people we imagined, but human beings wrestling with the same fundamental drives that have shaped every society throughout time, creating elaborate systems to sanctify what they couldn't suppress. The next time you walk past an old church or castle, remember that beneath those sacred stones lie secrets that would make our modern scandals seem quaint by comparison.